My daughter was glowing with excitement to introduce me to her fiancé, but the moment we met, his arrogant smile froze me in place. With a smirk, he leaned across the table and said, "You're a nobody. You don't matter here." My chest tightened and humiliation burned through me, but before I could respond, his father walked in. The instant his eyes landed on me, the room shifted, and what he revealed left everyone speechless. Stick around, because what happened next turned the entire room upside down. You won't believe the ending. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more shocking family twists. Being a father means carrying two conflicting truths at once. You want to protect your daughter forever, yet you know one day she will walk into the arms of someone else. When my daughter Lily told me she was engaged, I tried to hold both truths in my heart. She was my pride, my joy, the light I had leaned on ever since her mother passed away. Watching her grow into a strong, independent woman had been my life's greatest reward. Still, the idea of her getting married stirred emotions I wasn't prepared for. I told myself to focus on her happiness. She glowed whenever she spoke about her fiancé, Ethan. The way she described him, he was ambitious, well-spoken, and respectful. She insisted he came from a good family, the type of people who could open doors and make life easier. She spoke with the starry-eyed certainty only someone in love could muster. And though I had my doubts, I nodded along, trusting her judgment. The night she invited me to dinner to meet Ethan's family, I pressed my best shirt and polished the old watch Lily had given me years ago. My hands trembled slightly as I buttoned up, not from weakness but from nerves. I wanted to make a good impression, not because I felt the need to prove myself, but because I didn't want to embarrass my daughter. She mattered more than anything else, and if this young man truly loved her, then I would find it in my heart to accept him. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place I wouldn't have stepped into on my own. Crystal glasses gleamed in the low light, and the air buzzed with the quiet chatter of wealthy patrons. I could already feel eyes glancing at me. My modest jacket and worn shoes stood out against the sea of tailored suits. But Lily greeted me with a hug so warm it melted away my insecurities, at least for the moment. Then Ethan appeared. Tall, sharply dressed, his posture radiating confidence bordering on arrogance. His smile was thin, practiced, and when his eyes met mine, they didn't soften the way a future son-in-law should. Instead, I felt assessed, measured, and quietly dismissed in a single glance. We sat down, Lily chatting excitedly, trying to bridge the worlds between us. But I could already sense the storm brewing beneath Ethan's polished exterior. He leaned in, lowered his voice, and with that smug smirk said words that cut through me like a knife. "You're a nobody. You don't matter here." The world seemed to freeze in that instant. The words hung in the air heavier than the clinking of wine glasses or the hum of polite laughter around us. "You're a nobody." It wasn't shouted, yet it cut deeper than if he had screamed it across the room. Ethan leaned back in his chair, smug, as though he had delivered some great truth rather than an insult. My fists clenched under the table, but I swallowed my pride for Lily's sake. Lily, unaware of what had just happened, was still busy flipping through the menu and gushing about how her fiancé's family owned shares in businesses across the city. She didn't notice the sharp glint of superiority in Ethan's eyes or the way he regarded me as if I were a stain on the tablecloth. For a moment I considered leaving. Pride screamed at me to walk out, to never allow another man, especially someone who claimed to love my daughter, to look down on me like that. But then I saw Lily smile as she looked at him, so bright, so trusting. My chest tightened. If I left, if I reacted, she would only see anger where there was actually pain. I had to sit there quietly enduring. For her. The waiter arrived with wine and Ethan raised his glass high, making a show of boasting about his future and how his family was preparing to expand into new ventures. Every word dripped with arrogance, and though he never said my name again, his tone implied the same message. "You don't belong here." I could feel eyes from nearby tables flicking toward us. Maybe they didn't hear the words, but they sensed the dynamic. The polished, wealthy young man exuding confidence, and the older man across from him, sitting quietly in worn shoes. Appearances told a story that wasn't true, yet Ethan seemed pleased with the performance. Inside, anger burned hotter. I wasn't a man of wealth or prestige, not anymore, but I wasn't nobody. I had lived, worked, and built a life through sweat and sacrifice. I had raised Lily alone after her mother's passing, giving up dreams and comforts so she could have hers. Everything she was today, the education, the freedom to dream, even the confidence that made her fall in love, was because of me. And here sat a boy mistaking arrogance for strength, calling me nothing. I sipped my water slowly, forcing myself into silence. But as I looked at Ethan, I knew one thing. This wasn't over. Words like that had a way of unraveling the truth, and sooner or later, he'd learn exactly who he was dealing with. The meal hadn't even begun, but the tension between Ethan and me was already thick enough to choke on. I sat stiffly in my chair, trying to focus on Lily's animated chatter as she talked about wedding venues and honeymoon destinations. But Ethan's smirk lingered in my mind like a bruise that refused to fade. He was clever, at least he thought so. He never repeated his insult aloud where Lily could hear, but his actions spoke volumes. When the waiter asked for our orders, Ethan cut me off mid-sentence, dismissing my choice of meal as unsophisticated and suggesting something more suitable for the occasion. When I insisted on keeping my choice, his lips curled into that same mocking smile, as if my preference were another confirmation of my supposed inferiority. Lily giggled at his charm, mistaking his arrogance for confidence. She didn't notice the daggers hidden in his words, or the way he looked past me as though I were invisible. Every small act, correcting my pronunciation of a wine label, laughing at my story about repairing my old truck, boasting about his upcoming promotion, was another subtle blow meant to put me in my place. I studied him quietly. He was young, handsome, polished, the type of man who believed the world owed him respect simply because of his last name. But beneath the surface, I saw insecurity, the kind that needs constant validation, the kind that only feels powerful when tearing others down. It wasn't just arrogance. It was desperation to prove something. The truth was I'd met his type before. Years ago, when I was building my career, I'd sat across from men just like him in boardrooms and negotiations. Men who wore expensive suits but had fragile egos. Men who thought kindness was weakness and respect was earned only through intimidation. I had learned back then that patience often spoke louder than pride. And tonight, though my blood boiled, I clung to patience. As the first course arrived, Ethan leaned closer to Lily and whispered something that made her laugh. Then, deliberately loud enough for me to hear, he added, "Some people just don't understand what real success looks like." His eyes flicked toward me, and my fork froze in mid-air. I forced a calm smile. "Success takes many forms," I said evenly, meeting his gaze. "Sometimes it looks like raising a daughter who shines brighter than anyone else in the room." Lily blushed, touched by the compliment, but Ethan only scoffed, rolling his eyes as if my words meant nothing. He thought he had the upper hand. What he didn't know was that the night wasn't over, and soon the entrance of one man, his father, would shift everything in ways Ethan couldn't imagine. The dinner dragged on, each moment heavier than the last. The clinking of silverware and the hum of background conversation seemed to mock the storm brewing at our table. Lily, caught between her excitement and the polished charm she thought Ethan possessed, kept trying to include me in their plans, asking if I'd like to join them for cake tasting or if I had thoughts about her dress. Her voice was so full of hope, and I answered with a smile every time, not daring to let her see the sting behind my eyes. But Ethan wasn't done. He relished in every opportunity to remind me of my place. When the waiter refilled our glasses, Ethan made a show of discussing expensive wines, glancing at me as though to highlight how far out of my depth I was. When Lily mentioned wanting a small, intimate wedding, Ethan smirked and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. My family will cover the real costs. Your father doesn't need to worry about such things." His tone dripped with condescension, and though Lily didn't catch it, I did. Every barb was calculated, every smirk designed to strip away my dignity. Yet I held my tongue, not because his words didn't cut, but because I knew the truth. Real respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And while Ethan believed he held all the power in that restaurant, he had no idea of the weight carried by my silence. Still, a part of me wondered, was this the man my daughter truly loved? Was this arrogance what she mistook for strength? I had raised her to be strong, independent, and wise. Yet here she sat, blinded by infatuation, unable to see the cracks in his character. That hurt more than his insults. It hurt to think she might build her future on such fragile foundations. I glanced at the entrance, just as a figure in a tailored suit walked in, an older man, with a presence that instantly commanded the room. His posture was strong, his steps deliberate, and the way the maitre d' rushed to greet him told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just another guest. This was someone people noticed, someone people respected. Ethan hadn't seen him yet. He was too busy bragging about his new office promotion, gesturing wildly, as if the entire restaurant needed to hear his achievements. But the moment the older man began walking toward our table, something inside me shifted. Recognition sparked. I knew this man. Years ago, our paths had crossed in a world Ethan could never imagine. A world where respect wasn't bought with arrogance but earned through resilience, wisdom and integrity. And as the man drew closer, my lips curved into the faintest smile. Ethan had no idea what was about to happen. The boy who thought I was a nobody was about to discover exactly who I really was. The days after that humiliating dinner at the restaurant weighed heavily on me. I couldn't sleep without replaying my daughter's fiancé's words in my mind. "You're a nobody." The casual cruelty, the dismissive tone, the way my daughter sat silently, torn between loyalty and discomfort, it all dug into my heart like a dagger. I had spent my life working hard, building something from scratch, and to be reduced to nothing by a young man who hadn't seen a fraction of life's struggles felt unbearable. But what stung even more was my daughter's silence. She didn't defend me, not even a word. I reminded myself she was probably caught off guard, embarrassed, maybe even afraid of causing conflict. Still, I had raised her better. I had raised her to value respect, kindness, and family above all else. That night, I lay awake wondering if I had failed her somehow. The next morning, when she came to visit me at home, I tried to act normal. I poured her coffee, smiled, and asked about her day. But behind the small talk, my mind kept drifting back to her fiancé's face. The smug smirk, the arrogance. I could see she was uncomfortable, almost as though she wanted to say something but held herself back. Finally, I asked gently, "Do you really love him?" Her eyes filled with tears, and though she nodded, I caught a glimpse of hesitation, the kind of pause that reveals more than words. In the following weeks, preparations for the wedding grew intense. Invitations went out, dresses were chosen, the church was booked. I watched my daughter get pulled into a whirlwind of decisions, floral arrangements, guest lists, menus. But underneath it all, a current of unease ran through me. I noticed her fiancé's behavior more closely now. He wasn't just arrogant toward me, he was dismissive of her too. He made decisions without asking her, rolled his eyes when she voiced her opinion, and often reminded her that he knew better. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between them when I stopped by unannounced. He was on the phone, laughing loudly, boasting to a friend about how he'd soon marry into money because my daughter had inherited her late mother's jewelry and a small trust fund I had set aside for her future. My heart clenched. He didn't love her. He loved what she represented. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stand by silently. I had to protect her, even if it meant risking her anger. Still, I kept quiet for now. I needed proof. I needed a way to open her eyes without seeming like a bitter old man clinging to pride. I began to observe more carefully, collecting moments and words, each one painting a clearer picture of who he truly was. And then came the rehearsal dinner. The guest list was limited to close family and friends, and I attended quietly, trying to avoid confrontation. But fate had other plans. That night his parents arrived, people I hadn't seen in decades. As soon as his father's eyes landed on me, I saw recognition flicker across his face, followed by something else, respect and fear. In that instant I realized everything was about to change. The room seemed to freeze the moment his father's eyes locked onto mine. For a second I wasn't sure if he remembered, but then his expression shifted, like someone seeing a ghost from the past. He excused himself from his wife, straightened his jacket, and walked toward me with a stiffness that caught everyone's attention. My daughter noticed too, glancing nervously between us as if sensing a storm was brewing. "Is it really you?" he whispered, his voice low but heavy with disbelief. Before I could answer, he extended his hand firmly, the kind of handshake that carries respect and history. His son, my daughter's arrogant fiancé, frowned, clearly confused by his father's sudden change in demeanor. "Dad, you know this man?" he asked, his tone carrying that same smugness he'd used on me at the restaurant. His father shot him a sharp look, the kind that shuts down any arrogance. "Know him? Son, this man gave me my career." His words hung in the air, leaving everyone at the table stunned. I saw my daughter's eyes widen as she turned to me, silently begging for an explanation. "I didn't say anything yet. Let him explain," the father continued, recounting a story I hadn't thought about in years. "I was a young, desperate man once. No money, no connections. I was ready to give up on everything when he pointed at me, gave me a chance. He took me under his wing, trained me, introduced me to people who mattered. Without him, I would have had nothing." The fiancé's jaw tightened and his smug smile disappeared. For the first time, I saw something else in his eyes, fear. He was realizing that the nobody he had insulted wasn't just somebody, but the very man who had paved the way for his father's success. The irony was almost poetic. The rest of the evening shifted after that revelation. People began asking me questions, curious about my past, my achievements, and my role in building the very empire this young man's family now enjoyed. I kept my answers simple, humble even, because this wasn't about boasting, it was about letting the truth breathe. But every word his father said chipped away at the fiancé's arrogance, until he sat there quietly, no longer the loudest voice in the room. My daughter kept sneaking glances at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and shame. Pride for what I had accomplished, shame for not defending me earlier. I gave her a small, reassuring smile. This wasn't her fault. She had been blinded by love, by the illusion of security this man had promised her. But now cracks were forming in that illusion. As the dinner ended, the fiancé's father pulled me aside. "I never forgot what you did for me," he said earnestly. "If there's ever anything you need, just say the word. You're family to me." His words carried weight, and I knew they weren't just polite formalities. Meanwhile, the fiancé lingered in the corner, his posture stiff, his confidence completely unraveled. That night, as I walked home, I couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Maybe my daughter would finally see who her fiancé really was. Maybe this was the beginning of the truth surfacing. But deep down, I also knew arrogant men don't fall easily. They fight, claw, and manipulate to hold on to power. And I had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning of the battle. The days following the rehearsal dinner were tense, almost suffocating. My daughter seemed unusually quiet, avoiding long conversations and glancing at her fiancé with uncertainty she could no longer hide. I knew she was replaying everything in her mind, the cruel insult at the restaurant, the shocking recognition from his father, and the sudden shift in how everyone treated me. Her fiancé, however, was far from silent. I could sense the storm brewing in him. Men like him, built on arrogance and control, don't take humiliation lightly. That night had stripped him of his power in front of everyone he wanted to impress, and I knew he would come back swinging. It didn't take long. A couple of days later, my daughter called me in tears. "Dad, he's been different. He's angry all the time. He said you're trying to ruin our relationship." My heart sank, but I wasn't surprised. It was exactly what I expected. Instead of reflecting on his behavior, he twisted the narrative, painting me as the villain. I listened patiently, offering her comfort, but inside I was seething. This wasn't just arrogance anymore, it was manipulation. Soon his actions grew bolder. He began spreading subtle lies among family and friends. He whispered that I was jealous, that I couldn't let go of control, that I wanted to own my daughter's choices. He painted me as an overbearing father who refused to let his daughter grow up. I heard these rumors trickle back to me, each one sharper than the last. At first I tried to ignore them. I believed the truth would shine through, that people would see his deceit for what it was. But lies, when repeated often enough, begin to stain. I noticed some relatives growing distant, their greetings cooler, their eyes filled with suspicion. It hurt deeply, but I remained silent for my daughter's sake. She was already torn, and I didn't want to burden her with more conflict. Then came the breaking point. My daughter invited me to her apartment one evening. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her voice shaky. She sat me down and whispered, "He said I have to choose, Dad, between him and you." My heart nearly shattered hearing those words. No child should ever be forced into such a choice, least of all by someone claiming to love them. I reached for her hands, trembling in mine, and said softly, "You will never have to choose. I will always be here for you no matter what." Tears rolled down her cheeks, and I could see the inner battle tearing her apart. What she didn't know was that her fiancé had been standing in the hallway listening. He stormed in, his face red with rage. "See, he's manipulating you. He's trying to poison you against me," he shouted, his voice trembling with desperation. For the first time, my daughter didn't rush to defend him. Instead, she stared at him with wide eyes, as though she finally saw him clearly. He noticed her hesitation too, and that terrified him. In that instant, I knew he would become even more dangerous. A man who feels his grip slipping will tighten his fist until he either breaks what he holds or loses it forever. And as much as it pained me, I realized the battle was no longer just about my pride. It was about protecting my daughter from a man who was willing to destroy anyone, including her, to maintain control. After that heated confrontation in my daughter's apartment, the tension between us all became unbearable. I tried to give her space, hoping she'd see the truth for herself, but her fiancé doubled down on his efforts to isolate her from me. He convinced her to cancel dinners with me, postponed our usual phone calls, and even intercepted gifts I sent. The subtle wall he built between us was growing taller every day. Still, I noticed cracks. My daughter wasn't the same radiant young woman she had been before their engagement. She was quieter, more withdrawn, her spark dimming under the weight of his constant criticism and controlling behavior. I saw it in her eyes whenever I managed to catch her alone, an unspoken plea for help, though she wasn't ready to admit it yet. Meanwhile, his humiliation at the rehearsal dinner continued to gnaw at him. He couldn't stand that his father had praised me publicly, stripping away the image of superiority he had carefully constructed. I began hearing rumors that he was telling people his father exaggerated my role in his success, that I was just a small-time mentor trying to cling to relevance. The more he lied, the more desperate he sounded, but desperation is dangerous. Then one evening his father himself called me. His voice was firm, almost apologetic. "I don't know what's going on with my son, but I can see he's hurting your daughter. I want you to know I'm on your side." Those words were a relief, but they also confirmed my fears. Even his own family could see the toxicity in him. The real turning point came at a family gathering the following weekend. My daughter's fiancé arrived late, his temper already on edge. He had been drinking and his words were sharp, cutting through the air like knives. When my daughter tried to gently remind him to calm down, he snapped at her in front of everyone, calling her ungrateful and stupid. Gasps filled the room and I felt my blood boil. But before I could speak, his father stood up, his voice thunderous. "That's enough." The room fell silent. His father's face was pale but resolute. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is not the man I raised. And if you keep treating her this way, you'll lose far more than her." His words cut deeper than anything I could have said, because they came from the very man he had been trying to impress his whole life. My daughter's fiancé tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it as an overreaction, but no one was buying it anymore. The mask had slipped too far. The arrogance, the manipulation, the cruelty, it was all out in the open. That night, my daughter stayed at my house. She cried quietly, telling me how scared she was of making the wrong decision. I held her hand and told her the truth. Love doesn't cage you. It doesn't silence you. If it does, it isn't love, but I also knew he wasn't finished. Men like him don't just back away when the walls close in. They lash out, trying one last desperate attempt to hold on to control. And as I watched my daughter sleep that night, I realized the battle was about to reach its peak. The storm we had all been trying to avoid was finally here, and it would either destroy her or set her free. The storm broke sooner than I expected. Only a few days after my daughter had stayed with me, her fiancé showed up at my doorstep unannounced. He wasn't the smug, smooth-talking young man I'd seen before. His face was twisted with anger, his eyes bloodshot and his voice sharp with venom. "You think you've won, old man?" He spat, stepping dangerously close. "You think you can take her away from me? You're pathetic. She's mine. She chose me, not you." For a moment I stayed silent, trying to remain calm, but my heart pounded in my chest. He was unraveling. His arrogance had turned into desperation, and desperation often pushes men into reckless choices. I could see his fists clenched, his breathing uneven, like he was fighting to keep control but losing ground fast. My daughter came rushing down the hallway. She froze when she saw him, her face drained of color. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned to her with a sneer. "What am I doing here? I'm here to remind you who you belong to. Do you think you can just run off to Daddy every time things get hard? He's nothing. He's nobody." The irony of his words stung, but this time they didn't cut me. Because I wasn't the one he was trying to convince. He was trying to convince her and himself that he still had control. My daughter's eyes filled with tears, but this time I saw something new in them. "Not fear, not guilt, anger, stop it," she cried, her voice rising. "Stop talking to my father like that. Stop talking to me like that." The room went still. For the first time she stood up to him directly, her voice shaking but firm. I could see the shock on his face, like he never imagined she'd push back. His arrogance had always thrived on her silence, and now that silence was broken, he laughed bitterly, a hollow sound. "You think you're stronger than me now, because your father filled your head with nonsense? Without me, you're nothing. Nobody else will want you." That was the breaking point. His father, who had quietly arrived moments earlier after my urgent phone call, stepped into the room. His presence was like a hammer dropping. "Enough!" he thundered, his voice echoing through the house. The fiancé froze, spinning around to see his father glaring at him, disappointment etched into every line of his face. "Do you hear yourself?" his father demanded. "This isn't love. This is control, arrogance, abuse. And I won't let you destroy her or shame this family any further." My daughter's fiancé faltered, his bravado collapsing under his father's rage. He stammered, trying to justify himself, but the words fell flat. For the first time, the room wasn't his stage. The spotlight had shifted, and he was exposed for what he really was, a coward hiding behind arrogance. I stood there, my daughter's hand in mine, my heart pounding with both fear and relief. The battle wasn't over, not yet, but the tide had turned. He wasn't untouchable anymore. He was cornered, and I knew the next move would decide everything. His face turned crimson, his breathing quick and uneven. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The arrogance that had defined him, the smug grin he wore like armor, was gone. He looked from me to his father, then to my daughter, as if the world itself had turned against him. I can't believe you're siding with him," he stammered, his voice shaking. "You can't understand. He's trying to manipulate you." His father's eyes narrowed, cold and piercing. "Manipulate? You've been manipulating everyone, son, her, me, this entire family. And now it's time to face the consequences." My daughter stepped forward, her trembling hands gripping mine tightly. "He's lying to you," she said to her fiancé. "I finally see it. All this time it wasn't him trying to control me. It's you. You've been pretending to love me, but it's always been about power." The words hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth, then closed it, searching desperately for a rebuttal. But there was nothing left to say. The people in the room were watching, some shocked, some relieved, all aware that the mask he had so carefully built was shattered. Then came his final, reckless move. In a desperate attempt to reclaim control, he lunged toward my daughter's phone, where she had secretly recorded one of his outbursts earlier. He tried to snatch it away, hoping to erase proof of his manipulation. But I was faster. I stepped in front of him, firm and unwavering. "Step back," I said, my voice steady. He froze, surprised at my sudden resolve. He had spent so long trying to intimidate, to dominate, and yet here I was, unshaken, standing between him and the proof of his deceit. His father moved beside me, towering with authority, and the look in his eyes was clear. This behavior would no longer be tolerated. The fiancé's anger turned to panic. He began pacing, yelling, trying to spin the story, but every word he spoke now sounded hollow. His lies had no footing. The truth was too visible, too undeniable. The very people he had hoped to impress now saw him for what he truly was, arrogant, controlling, and desperate. Finally, my daughter lifted her head, her voice strong and unwavering. "I won't marry someone who treats me or my family like this. Not now, not ever." The words struck him harder than any insult I could have thrown. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. His father shook his head, disappointed but resolute. "It's over, son. Accept it and move on." I watched him leave, finally defeated. My daughter sank into my arms, tears flowing freely. Relief, fear, and exhaustion mixed together, but above all there was clarity. The battle had been fought, the masks removed, and the truth revealed. And in that moment I knew our lives had changed forever, but for the better. The aftermath of the confrontation was electric. The room, once filled with tension and fear, now hummed with an uneasy silence. Everyone could feel the shift. The young man who had once carried himself with arrogance was now diminished, exposed, and powerless. My daughter clung to my arm, still trembling, but her eyes glimmered with a strength she hadn't displayed in weeks. Her fiancé slumped into a chair across the room, trying to collect himself. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked around, hoping for support, and found none. His own family, the very people he had relied on for admiration, sat silently, exchanging glances that spoke louder than any condemnation. His father's stare was fixed on him, steady and unforgiving, and it was clear. The man had lost not only his power, but the respect he had taken for granted. I stepped closer to my daughter, whispering words of reassurance. "You did nothing wrong. You were brave. You stood up for yourself and for the truth." Her grip on my hand tightened, a mixture of gratitude and relief flooding her expression. For the first time in weeks, she was free from the tension that had shadowed her every smile. The young man, realizing the evening was slipping entirely from his control, attempted one last manipulative tactic. He raised his voice, trying to twist the story, claiming I had orchestrated everything to humiliate him. But the room no longer hung on his every word. The laughter, the disbelief, the subtle shaking of heads, everything told him that the facade he had built had crumbled. Then his father spoke again, and the room fell completely silent. "Son, do you see now why respect and integrity matter more than arrogance and deceit? Everything you thought you had is gone. And it's gone because you chose control over compassion, lies over truth." The words struck him like a hammer, leaving him visibly shaken. My daughter, emboldened, looked him straight in the eyes. "I trusted you. I wanted to believe in us. But you've shown me who you really are. I won't let fear, manipulation, or arrogance dictate my life." The young man's lips quivered, and for a fleeting moment I saw panic, desperation, and regret flash across his face. He realized that no more arguments, no more lies, and no more posturing could save the situation. His control was gone, and with it his future with my daughter. I breathed deeply, letting the tension ease slightly. Though the battle had been long and exhausting, the truth had finally come to light. No more games, no more whispers of manipulation. My daughter had regained her power, her voice, and her dignity. And as her father, I finally felt the weight on my chest lift, relief, pride, and love all mingling together in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. The night ended quietly after that. The arrogant young man left defeated, leaving only the echoes of his folly behind. And as I looked at my daughter, I knew this was more than a victory over arrogance. It was a lesson in strength, truth, and the enduring power of family. Even after the young man had left, the room felt charged, as if the air itself was holding its breath. My daughter and I sat together, recovering from the storm that had just passed. Her hands trembled slightly in mine, but her eyes, once clouded with uncertainty, now shone with clarity. It wasn't just the confrontation that mattered, it was the truth being revealed. The realization that her fiancé's arrogance and manipulation had been carefully disguised, and that she had nearly given him control over her life, left her both shaken and empowered. She looked at me, a silent question in her gaze. I squeezed her hand and nodded. "You see it now, don't you?" She nodded, tears spilling over, but this time there was a smile behind them, a smile of relief and newfound strength. "I never realized. I thought he loved me," she whispered, "but now I see he only cared about what he could take." At that moment, the unexpected happened. Her fiancé's father, who had remained quiet after the confrontation, stepped forward with a softer tone. "I owe you more than I can say," he said to me. "Without your guidance, I wouldn't be who I am today. And without your courage tonight, my son would have gone too far. Thank you for standing strong, for protecting her, and for holding on to the truth." The young man's arrogance had not only collapsed, it had exposed the cracks in his entire family dynamic. His father's respect for me, and his recognition of my role in his life, was a silent confirmation that the truth could never be hidden. The young man had underestimated the power of integrity, of patience, and of quiet strength. As we left the gathering, my daughter leaned on me, a mixture of exhaustion and relief washing over her. "Dad, thank you," she murmured. "I don't know what I would have done without you." I smiled, ruffling her hair gently. "You don't have to thank me. You made the right choice, and that's what matters." Later that evening, as I reflected on everything, I realized something important. Life has a way of teaching lessons in the harshest ways, but it also rewards patience and resilience. The arrogant young man had tried to intimidate, manipulate, and control, but in the end, truth prevailed. And sometimes, the most important victories are the ones that protect the ones we love. The storm had passed, but the lessons lingered. My daughter had found her voice. The young man had faced the consequences of his actions. And I, her father, had once again proven that standing firm in truth and love can change the course of lives forever. And in that quiet moment, I knew this chapter had ended, leaving only clarity, justice, and the unshakable bond between a father and his daughter. The days after that stormy evening felt surreal. The young man had disappeared from our lives, his attempts to assert control crushed beneath the weight of truth and exposure. My daughter and I returned to our routines, but something fundamental had shifted. Our bond had grown stronger, deeper and more unshakable. She had started talking more openly again, sharing her thoughts and fears without hesitation. The fear and doubt that had clouded her for weeks were gone, replaced by confidence. I watched her laugh again, free and unguarded, and I knew that the battle we had fought was not just about a failed engagement, it was about reclaiming her life from manipulation and deceit. Family gatherings took on a different tone. Relatives who had once been quiet observers now expressed support openly. They could see the change, and they admired the courage it took to stand firm. Whispers of respect for me circulated quietly, and it felt satisfying, not because I sought praise, but because my daughter's well-being and clarity were finally recognized. Even the fiancé's father, who had once seemed distant, reached out several times over the following week. "You've done more for your daughter than you realize," he said once. "And more than you know, you've shown my son what it means to be accountable, honest and courageous." His words were genuine, a silent acknowledgement that the power dynamic had completely shifted. My daughter and I spent long evenings reflecting on the ordeal. We talked about the warning signs, the manipulation, and the subtle ways a controlling personality can sneak into one's life. She listened intently, nodding and occasionally laughing at my stories of past encounters with arrogant men. The tension from before had dissolved, replaced by understanding and preparation for the future. There were moments when I caught her staring into the distance, contemplative. I knew she was processing everything that had happened, her engagement, the confrontation, and the realization of who truly deserved her trust. I didn't interrupt. I let her work it out, knowing she would emerge stronger. And in those quiet moments, I realized that sometimes the most powerful victories are not dramatic gestures, but the slow, steady reclaiming of confidence, the reaffirmation of trust, and the subtle but undeniable assertion of truth over deception. The young man's shadow was gone, but the lessons remained. My daughter had learned to recognize manipulation. I had demonstrated unwavering support, and together we had reclaimed a part of life that arrogance and deceit had threatened to steal. Word of the confrontation spread quickly, though not through gossip or malice, but because people were genuinely stunned by the revelation. Friends and family alike reached out to express support for my daughter and to acknowledge the courage it had taken to confront the truth. For the first time, it felt like the weight of the young man's arrogance had lifted from all of us, leaving space for clarity and peace. Social gatherings were noticeably different. Relatives who had previously hesitated to take sides now openly respected our stance. Invitations that had once been awkward were now filled with warmth. My daughter could participate without fear of tension, and I felt the subtle shift in the way people treated me, not as a nobody, but as a father who had stood firm, guided his child and protected her from harm. The fiancé's father reached out once more, this time to privately discuss the repercussions for his son. "He has a lot to learn," he said, his tone serious but calm. "I've always valued you and the guidance you provided him long ago. Tonight the lesson was overdue, and I hope it sticks. It was a moment of quiet acknowledgement that comforted me, affirming that the younger man's arrogance had consequences far beyond what he could have imagined. At home, my daughter and I spent evenings talking about her future, not just her relationships, but the life she wanted to lead, the values she wanted to uphold, and the boundaries she needed to maintain. She listened intently, soaking up lessons that extended beyond this one experience, realizing that strength wasn't just about standing up to someone else, it was also about knowing oneself and recognizing what's worth fighting for. We also addressed her emotional recovery. The control and manipulation had left subtle marks of fear and self-doubt which we worked through slowly. Each day, her confidence returned a little more. She began making decisions independently again, free from the looming shadow of a man who had tried to dominate her. The sense of empowerment was palpable, and it reminded me that sometimes the aftermath of a storm can be as important as the storm itself. Even in public, my daughter's demeanor changed. She walked taller, spoke with clarity, and laughed freely. People noticed the transformation, and it became clear that the ordeal, while painful, had forged resilience in her character. And as her father, witnessing this growth was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. In the weeks that followed, the lingering tension began to dissolve. Friends, extended family, and even neighbors who had sensed the strain gradually came forward, offering words of support and understanding. My daughter, once quiet and apprehensive, was now confident and assured, her laughter returning as a soundtrack to our home. Her former fiancé had attempted to reach out through messages and calls, but by then both my daughter and I had grown wary. She no longer felt the pressure to respond. She was no longer trapped by fear or manipulation. Every word he sent only highlighted his desperation and the consequences of his past behavior. Each ignored message was a small but meaningful victory, reinforcing that truth and integrity had finally prevailed. Even within our family circle, subtle shifts took place. Relatives who had previously questioned my judgment now openly acknowledged the wisdom of standing firm. They noticed my daughter's newfound clarity, her ability to set boundaries, and her courage to speak her mind. Conversations that were once tense now flowed freely, filled with mutual respect and a shared understanding of the ordeal we had endured. Her fatherly role had also taken on a new dimension. No longer was I merely a parent. I had become a symbol of resilience, of standing up for what was right even when the odds seemed against us. People reached out privately to express gratitude, not only for my guidance, but for showing that family unity and moral strength could overcome manipulation and deceit. My daughter and I began to focus on the future with renewed optimism. We planned small celebrations, family dinners and outings, rebuilding trust and joy in our daily lives. The shadow of arrogance that had once loomed over us had been replaced with light, clarity, and a sense of safety. It was a time of healing, reflection, and quiet celebration of truth prevailing over lies. And though the memory of confrontation remained, it no longer held power over us. Instead, it served as a reminder, a lesson in vigilance, integrity, and the importance of standing up for oneself and for those you love. My daughter's confidence was restored, and our bond, strengthened through adversity, had become unbreakable. By this point, life had begun to regain a sense of normalcy. The tension that had haunted our home for weeks slowly faded, replaced with laughter, conversation, and the warmth of family bonds restored. My daughter moved freely, no longer weighed down by fear or uncertainty, and I could finally breathe knowing she was safe and empowered. Her confidence in herself and her decisions had grown immensely. She began asserting her opinions with clarity, taking control of her future, and surrounding herself with people who respected her boundaries. Every day, I watched her reclaim her sense of self, a transformation that was as gratifying as it was inspiring. Even the extended family and social circles who had been caught in the crossfire started to see the change. The arrogance and manipulation of her former fiancé were now widely acknowledged, and conversations about the ordeal often ended with praise for the way we had handled it. People respected my daughter's resilience, my patience, and the calm strength I had shown throughout the ordeal. Occasionally, my daughter would glance at me with a quiet smile, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond we had reinforced during the turmoil. Our relationship, already strong, had grown deeper. She had learned to trust her instincts, to question manipulation, and to recognize the difference between love and control. And I had learned once again the power of patience, integrity, and standing firm for those we love. The young man never returned. His attempts to manipulate and intimidate had failed, leaving him with only the weight of his own arrogance and mistakes. His father, though still respectful toward me, now guided his son from a distance, knowing that some lessons must be learned the hard way. In the quiet evenings, my daughter and I would sit together, reflecting on what had happened. We spoke about lessons learned, the importance of courage and the power of speaking truth to authority, even when it felt impossible. The storm had passed, but the clarity and strength it had revealed were permanent, and as the days went on it became clear our lives had been irrevocably changed for the better. My daughter had grown stronger, our family had grown closer, and the toxic presence that had threatened to disrupt everything had been removed. The ordeal was over, but the lessons and the bond forged in adversity would last a lifetime. If this story left you shocked and inspired, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable family twists. Every week, we bring you real stories full of suspense, emotion, and shocking revelations that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Share this video with friends and family who love dramatic, true-life stories, and leave a comment below telling us what you would have done in my place. Don't miss the next video. It promises even more twists, betrayals, and jaw-dropping moments that you won't see coming. Click the bell icon so you're always the first to know when a new story drops, and join our growing community of viewers who love real, emotional, and suspense-filled family stories.